Hey everyone, I'm sorry I can't be in the room with you today, but I am honored to share this work, which applies diffusion models to help scale wind power solutions. My name is Mike Sierks, and I'm presenting on behalf of our team at Sust Global. And given the theme of the conference, I really want to spend my time today motivating the problem statement and the application, rather than diving into model specifics and methods. That information is detailed in our submission, and you should go check it out. There's a lot of really great content we just don't have time to cover today. My goal here is to articulate the problem facing wind energy planners, touch on the role of machine learning to fill this gap, and end with a demonstration on how this all fits together in practice. And so with that, let's get into it. Wind is crucial to global decarbonization. It's been coming online rapidly across the globe, in particular regions like Europe, where 30% of all energy may be generated by wind at the end of the decade. And hitting ambitious climate targets requires both strategic site selection and healthy investment in wind projects. Now, the best sites have strong and consistent winds and have suitable local terrain, open plains or ridgelines. And regarding investment, wind projects have huge upfront costs, and they require thoughtful financing. And that financing, it's largely based on historical wind data. When considering a potential project, a revenue forecast gets created, using historical wind data to estimate the electricity that could be generated over the project's lifetime of roughly 30 years. And this revenue forecast plays a large role in investment and financing decisions. And the industry today faces major headwinds, from supply chains to geopolitical tensions and macroeconomic outlooks. It's more important now than ever to ensure that investments in wind are maximizing efficiency and keep this sector growing. And so, given what we know, we pose the question, are we prepared to scale wind in a warmer world? A turbine built today will be spinning in 2050. Is historical data still appropriate to project revenues? Recent studies suggest that winds likely will change, but that regional differences are going to matter greatly. And if historical data is no longer sufficient, how can climate models add value? Out of the box, it's limited. These tools need to be downscaled and bias corrected before they can be useful to energy planners. Now, luckily, machine learning techniques are well suited for downscaling climate data. Just briefly skimming the surface here, CNNs and GANs have been used across the Earth system, though each presents its own limitations. And recently, Denoising diffusion probabilistic models, or DDPMs, have burst onto the scene and shown improvements over their predecessors. And so, motivated by this forward-looking data gap facing the wind industry and the advent of machine learning and downscaling climate model data, we propose a DDPM-based framework to generate high-resolution and bias-corrected projections of wind speed and energy generation. Now, to do this, we rely on historical wind reanalysis at low resolution from ERA5 and high resolution from SARA. We also use remotely sensed terrain data, things like slope and aspect, to train our model. And at the core of this DDPM approach is a denoising diffusion network that learns to reconstruct high-resolution wind fields by estimating and removing noise through a controlled diffusion process. Now, during training, the model doesn't actually directly predict wind speeds. Rather, it learns how to estimate noise that gets added to clean high-resolution wind fields. And through this process, the model learns how to denoise and reconstruct the high-resolution data. And now, during inference, or the reverse diffusion process, the model starts from a purely noisy image and progressively refines it, iteratively removing noise across multiple steps. And the result here is a downscaled version of your low-resolution input. Before running straight to climate projections, we first validate the model by downscaling previously unseen ERA5 data. Showing here, ERA5 low-res input on the left, high-resolution target on the right, with our model inference in the center, we can see that qualitatively, the inference is doing a good job at resolving both large and local scale features. Not shown here, we also see that the model outperforms both by linearly interpolating the low resolution as well as a more simple CNN-based model. And so, confident that we can downscale historical data, we can pivot to climate projections. And for this, we're going to rely on NASA Next GDDP CMIP6 data. This is data that takes raw CMIP6 output, performs bias correction and downscaling to yield projections that are more consistent with the historical climate, and it's offered at 25 kilometers. Now, because this data has already undergone bias correction to align the historical simulations with observed data, we can reasonably expect our model's learned patterns are going to generalize well when we apply them to these future projections. And now, finally, to account for any potential discrepancies between ERA5 and this NASA dataset, we implement a secondary bias correction step that is designed to essentially reduce wind speeds in regions where NASA tends to overestimate them compared to ERA5 and increase them where it tends to underestimate. And so at this point now, we have daily projections of wind speed out to 2050 across our domain. Now we take these daily projections and we can run them through turbine curves, which translate wind speed into a resulting power output. So now we have estimates of wind power generation out to 2050. And with this workflow in place, we can actually examine in practice how an investor could use this data to help make decisions. To do this, we're going to examine a simplified case study just to highlight the risks of using backward-looking data for investing in wind power under climate change. Now, at this potential site, we find that winds are projected to decrease relative to historical baseline by about 1.5% in 2030 and 3% in 2040. This may not sound like a huge change. However, wind power scales with the cube of wind speed, meaning that small changes in wind speed will lead to larger changes in power output. And indeed, if we look at the median annual power generated at this site over the 3 different periods, we find generation decreases by 5% and 10% respectively at 2030 and 2040. And so we see that in this situation, if historical data was used rather than forward-looking projections, the project could be overvalued by as much as 5%, resulting in unexpected underperformance for the investment. And the issue here isn't that one site may underperform, but that if wind projects are systematically performing differently than expected, it could lead to decreasing investment in the industry, which we know to be critical to global decarbonization. Our goal here is to show a proof of concept that with a single GCM, DDPMs can help fill this critical forward-looking data gap. So what comes next? We have partnered with a leading infrastructure investment firm to help refine the quality and utility of our power estimations. Further, to better understand the uncertainty in the trends, we plan to expand the model ensemble size as well as our coverage regions to build tools for a global audience. With that, I say thank you very kindly to the organizers and to all of you listening, and for the work that you're doing to tackle climate change. I'm sorry I can't be here for questions, but please check out the submitted paper and please feel free to reach out via email or LinkedIn. Cheers.